Bon matin, bon matin. Je vous souhaite la bienvenue à la séance publique du conseil d'administration du CUSM. Et je demanderai à un des membres de bien vouloir proposer notre ordre du jour. Merci, Laurie. Thank you, Vincent. Y a-t-il des commentaires ou changements ou additions à apporter? Non. Est-ce qu'il y a des gens qui sont contrariés par l'agenda tel quel? J'entends rien. Alors, on va prendre pour acquis que c'est accepté. Le procès-verbal du 19 janvier 24. Est-ce que je peux avoir une motion pour l'approuver? Merci, Uriel. Un secondaire, merci, Sarah. Y a-t-il des questions ou des commentaires sur les minutes? Non. D'accord, on va le prendre pour acquis que c'est accepté. Les affaires découlant. Business arising from the minutes.
Aucune affaire.
D'accord, no business arising, great. Item number 5 is approval of the consent resolutions. As a reminder, these resolutions have been reviewed by the various committees of the board and have been recommended to the board for our approval. We do this systematically to manage the agenda of the board so that we focus on the critical things that we need to know and understand, and the others get really dealt with in detail at the committees. So could I have a motion for the approval of the consent agenda items? Je vais avoir une motion pour les résolutions de consentement. Merci, Sarah. Et un secondaire, Vincent. Merci. Y a-t-il des changements? Is anybody interested in discussing any of these items and having them discussed in full and pulled out from the consent? No? Okay. Is anyone contrary-minded on the items in the consensus items? No. Alors, il n'y a personne d'avis contraire. Alors, je déclare les résolutions approuvées et nous allons directement à la présentation du président directrice générale d'affaires publiques.
Merci beaucoup, M. Crate. On va continuer avec la présentation. Je vais juste regarder une chose ici. OK. Alors, voici les sujets dont je vais vous parler aujourd'hui. On va regarder le bilan de l'année. Une fois par année, ce que j'aimerais faire, c'est de prendre une pause et regarder toutes les différentes choses qu'on a faites. Alors, ça va être aujourd'hui. De vous présenter le nouvel organigramme, de vous partager quelques prix et reconnaissances que nos médecins et nos professionnels ont eus, puis aussi vous partager quelques éléments de nous dans les nouvelles. Prochain diapo. Prochain diapo. Alors, voici en termes de quelques objectifs qu'on s'est donnés comme objectif depuis un an. Un, c'était de mettre en place une structure pour bâtir notre capacité en matière d'innovation. C'est un élément que plusieurs ont mentionné comme, évidemment, c'est essentiel dans un milieu hospitalier universitaire d'avoir l'innovation et de voir comment faciliter tous ces éléments-là. Et, à vrai dire, la présentation en lien avec ça va être donnée par Dr. Forster après ma présentation ce matin. Puis, aussi, c'est de regarder comment créer une culture fondée sur des données pour obtenir des performances exceptionnelles. L'autre était de regarder, pour se donner vraiment l'influence et l'approche de vraiment avoir un focus sur quelques résultats en lien avec les priorités ministérielles et bien sûr en même temps pour l'accès pour nos patients, les listes d'attente et l'accès pour la chirurgie, les résultats laboratoires et nos DMS aux urgences. Alors, et aussi parce que c'est très important, on fait tellement de choses incroyables comme institution, de trouver l'importance des fois, si quelqu'un travaille en chirurgie, mais ils ne savent pas qu'est-ce que l'autre personne en pédiatrie ou l'autre personne en obstétrique fait, de voir comment entre nous, et même avec notre communauté, comment on peut partager nos bons coups entre nous et s'inspirer un et l'autre en ça. So, here are the objectives that we gave ourselves for the past year, and it's really something that we're going to do every year to kind of look back and see. Sometimes we don't realize, I think, when we're in it, how much it is that we managed to do in a year. So it was to build a capacity in innovation, and Dr. Forster's going to be here to talk about that. Really moving towards creating a data-driven organization to see how to use data to decide where it is that we're going to try to make changes. And the next would be to look at access, key projects in terms of access to care, surgery, lab results that took a hit, for example, during pandemic, as we focused on COVID results to do other laboratory tests, as well as our length of stay in the emergency room. And lastly, in terms of the importance, we're a large organization with a lot of incredible things going on, and to see how to better foster and share the different innovations and successes that we have. Next slide. Alors, on va commencer avec les différents, vraiment, ça va être maintenant ponctuel pour regarder quels sont les éléments qu'on a fait. Alors ça, c'est en termes d'accès. Comme j'ai dit, le premier point en termes d'innovation, ça c'est quelque chose qui va être une présentation à part avec Dr. Forster après. Alors, je saute tout de suite pour partager qu'est-ce qu'on a fait en termes de, comme tout le monde, entre administration, gestionnaire et professionnels de la santé, médecins, en lien avec l'accès dans les trois domaines que j'ai dit. Premier ici, c'est la fluidité hospitalière, avec le but vraiment d'aller diminuer notre durée moyenne de séjour à l'urgence. Alors ça, c'est vraiment le point central avec tout central sur le diapositive. Puis, on voit tout autour, c'est vraiment pas fait pour le lire, mais tous les différents projets qui ont soit débuté et qui vont débuter, tout avec le même objectif qui est d'influencer et diminuer la durée moyenne de séjour, qui veut dire nécessairement de voir comment améliorer la fluidité hospitalière. Next slide. So if we look at, this is the list of projects now more in a chart form that the previous chart had in a diagram form. The list of projects, many of which are really targeting to see how we can address, and I mentioned length of stay in the emergency room. The largest length of stay, really, by far and away, are patients waiting for access to hospital beds. So anything that decreases length of stay on the hospital floor or gives patients a different way to access care for which they're waiting in the emergency room right now, all really has an impact on that. So again, here are different regroupings. The first regrouping that we see are coordinating hospital flow. The second one is in terms of patient reorientation to get care in other ways. The third regrouping is to see how to give care from in an ambulatory setting and maybe even a virtual setting. And lastly are some communication tools. Again, many of them, or if not most, with the goal of increasing or decreasing lengths of stay and impacting our ER wait times. And the one at the bottom is to is to see how to help in terms of patient communications. So it's really not to go from one to another to describe them fully, but more to give a sense of the fact that there are a lot of different projects. In green, we see the ones that are in place. In yellow, we see ones that are starting, and in light beige, ones that have yet to start. And so with those goals. So really a lot of movement with respect to both addressing lengths of stay, as well as clinical transformation and communication. One thing maybe I'll mention on this particular slide on the communications tool is that over the past few months, all outpatient clinics now send text messages to patients to let them know about their upcoming visit, as well as the location where that visit is, with the possibility to confirm. The goal is, of course, number one, to remind patients and to have a decrease in no-shows of patients, which are very valuable because other patients could be put in their place, but also to decrease the volume of telephones for that kind of information that come through, to liberate those people to address other questions that patient and concerns that patients might have. Next slide. Maintenant, je me tourne vers l'attente en chirurgie. Alors, ce qu'on voit ici avec la ligne rouge, c'est janvier de 2023. Alors, ce qu'on voit, la courbe en jaune, c'est le nombre de patients qui attendaient au CUSM une chirurgie de plus qu'1 an. Et ça combine et oui, alors ça c'est, et en bleu, on voit le volume de chirurgie qu'on fait. Alors, ce qu'on voit, c'est que au cours de l'année, le volume de nombre de cas qu'on fait est en train d'augmenter. C'est une bonne nouvelle. Et ce qu'on voit en jaune, c'est que les patients qui attendent plus qu'1 an a baissé d'à peu près 50%. Qui est une excellente nouvelle. Puis pour faire ça, il y a beaucoup de changements de processus qui ont été faits dans la cogestion médicale et administrative pour aller chercher cette baisse de liste d'attente-là. Et on est à l'intérieur des cibles qui nous avaient données par le ministère de Santé. Alors, très bonne nouvelle pour les patients qui attendent plus qu'1 an. Et bien sûr, on travaille encore pour voir comment augmenter tous nos volumes de chirurgie pour baisser la liste totale. Prochain diapo. Now we have this, and here we have laboratory results. So this is an example of some of the lab tests that aren't routine everyday tests. So they're not the CBCs or the sodiums or potassiums that of course are all done within several hours, but some that we had doctors complaining about that they were taking a long time. So for example, anti-TTG, which is for celiac disease, or TB quantification, or ANA, which is in rheumatological diseases. You see that in 2023, for example, the anti-TTG wait time was 70 days for a test result, where the expected days, because there are kind of targets for expected days, is 10. So that, again, with process change, went down to 3 days currently. Same thing if we look at TB quantification, it used to be 84 days with a target, an acceptable target of 20 days. We're now down to 4 days. And ANA, which was in 2023 100 days, has melted down to 7, which is there where it's expected. There are other tests that are also done infrequently that are being looked at to have the same type of processes being addressed to it. A lot of this is due to moving towards automation. So instead of doing manual tests, to see how to regroup and do automatic test results. So that is something that is continuing to do for some other blood tests. Next slide. Ici, on voit, regardons maintenant les salles d'urgence. Alors ça, si on voit le nombre, l'évaluation de nombre de visites, on a en orange une augmentation de nombre de visites depuis les 3 dernières périodes versus le jaune de l'année passée. Si on regarde à gauche, pourquoi est-ce que le nombre total qu'on voit en 2022 versus 2023 est plus petit? C'est parce qu'on n'a pas terminé encore l'année au complet. Si on compare le 175 000 versus le 155 000. Mais on a plus de visites à l'urgence. Ça, il va falloir qu'on voit comment s'adresser à ça parce qu'il y a quand même des personnes qui n'ont pas besoin des soins d'urgence, qui peuvent être réorientées vers des cliniques, etc. Alors, nous travaillons pour avoir, par exemple, en pédiatrie, des infirmières directement à l'urgence pour, après le triage, réorienter directement et ne pas attendre dans la salle d'urgence. Mais encore aux adultes, même ça, on regarde, est-ce qu'on peut avoir d'autres solutions, comme par exemple l'hôpital de jour au général qui est ouvert, ou bien des cliniques accès rapide que nous avons ouverts. Mais bref, encore une fois, d'adresser ce volume additionnel-là pour ne pas attendre à l'urgence. Prochain diapo. Si on regarde avec ça, encore une fois à gauche, on a, en termes de moyens, on est allé et ça, les chiffres sont ambulatoires plus civières. On est allé de 6h37 minutes en moyen, qui a baissé à 5h55 en termes d'un DMS. La graphique démontre plus ceux qui sont sur civière, qui attend plus. Mais si on regarde le total, on a quand même baissé de plus que 40 minutes notre temps avec les éléments qui ont été faits. Et il va falloir aussi regarder comment on baisse ceux qui attendent pour monter en civière avec tous les différents projets qu'on a faits. Si on va au prochain diapo. Maintenant, en oncologie, le CUSM, depuis 18 mois, se retrouve en premier rang en termes d'essais cliniques en oncologie, avec le recrutement de quelques oncologues, puis avec aussi un refonte de quelques systèmes. Et l'important ici, c'est que les oncologues travaillent en collaboration avec d'autres sites. So it is quite actually critical in terms of approach for clinical trials, the approach in terms of collaborative, so that you're not just one site opening, but for example, with other McGill sites like the Jewish General Hospital as part of the Rossi Cancer Network, that we open trials where we collaboratively open and recruit for that. But also, for example, in sarcoma, where we're one of the sites, and we're working with HMF to, again, do a collaborative website to see how to facilitate access for all sarcoma cancer patients, regardless of where they're treated. And so that collaborative aspect is really quite essential to see how across the hospital networks we can increase clinical trials. Why is that so important? It's been shown time and time again that having access to clinical trials is helpful for survival of patients. Just in terms of at the MUHC, now back to the MUHC, there are in 3 different breast cancer trials, we had the world first enrollments of patients. For the last 3 years, the MUHC has been first in Canada in terms of the number of gynae-oncology trials. We became over the past year, a dedicated facility that's been recognized, and it's one has to have accreditation, which is quite strict in terms of CAR T-cell therapy. And again, historically for sarcoma trials, we had about 2 per year, and we're now up to targeting, and we currently have 12 for access to our patients. Next slide. Some of the different centers that have opened in the past year, we have, first of all, the We have two here that I would like to mention. Le premier étant, et j'ai déjà mentionné ça en passant, c'est l'hôpital de jour qui est ouvert il y a quelques semaines seulement au site de l'hôpital général de Montréal. Ceci dit, même si c'est physiquement à l'hôpital général de Montréal, les patients qui arrivent aux urgences, qui pourraient bénéficier, qui arrivent par exemple au Glen ou à la Chine, sont également éligibles de venir utiliser l'hôpital de jour au général. Et ici, on dirige les patients qui, des fois, passent des heures, sinon pas des jours, à l'urgence pour soit des infusions, soit des processus diagnostiques, qui peuvent par contre aller coucher à la maison et venir à l'hôpital de jour pour recevoir ces séries de tests ou ces séries d'infusions-là. On voit que le nombre de patients qui sont venus là augmente semaine après semaine, avec le but, encore une fois, de diminuer l'engorgement et le temps d'attente à l'urgence. And in terms of looking at specific metrics to see how the day hospital is affecting wait times is something that we need to look at. The second unit is the ERAS, the Enhanced Recovery After Surgery Unit, in French called RAC, Récupération améliorée après chirurgie. And this is a physical unit, also at the MGH, but it's really part of a trajectory. So it's a part of a trajectory of care where everyone around a patient's surgery, and I'm talking about anesthetists, surgeons, respiratory therapists, nursing, physiotherapy, comes around and sees what's the best approach for example, a colon surgery. And these specific trajectories, what has happened is that patients have faster recovery, shorter complications, and in fact, shorter hospital stays. And those stays for those specific trajectories occur in the ERAS unit. Ce qu'on a vu depuis l'ouverture au mois de novembre, c'est que le taux d'annulation pour les chirurgies au MGH ont diminué de 9 à 2%. Puis évidemment, quand on fait des chirurgies plus avec les durées moyennes de séjour qui sont plus rapides, ça veut dire que nous pouvons aussi faire plus de patients sur les listes d'attente qui ont besoin d'un lit hospitalier. Prochain diapo. En termes de cardiologie, nous avons aussi une équipe vraiment de pointe en électrophysiologie et cette équipe aussi ont participé, c'est pas juste en oncologie qu'on peut avoir des essais cliniques. L'équipe en électrophysiologie, encore une fois, je donne vraiment des exemples. Hein? J'aimerais quand même, il y a quand même si je parle de cardiologie ou oncologie, je ne peux pas parler de tous les essais cliniques qu'on fait en néphrologie, puis dans tous les autres spécialités en obstétrique, etc., etc. Alors, vraiment, je présente ici des exemples. Alors qu'il y a plusieurs essais cliniques ici, également pour regarder des technologies qui sont utilisées pour la première fois dans les humains. Alors, vraiment assez unique sur un niveau et une échelle mondiale. Prochaine diapo. Now, in medical genetics, so that the MUHC is the Quebec leader in medical genetics, with currently serving doing two-thirds of Quebec's cancer population, because sometimes one needs genetics in those areas where the cancer care needs molecular genetics in terms of either the diagnosis or sometimes in terms of the selection of treatment. And so we really pride ourselves on being open and available to the entire Quebec population for their needs for molecular genetics from that standpoint, and continue to work as part of, again, a réseau, a collaboration, with seeing how we advance molecular genetics across the province. Next slide. Quelques exemples aussi, par exemple, multidisciplinaires. j'aimerais souligner le fait qu'on a déployé un nouveau programme pour la prévention de déconditionnement qui s'appelle ALEA, pour regarder comment inclure au service des urgences les éléments tellement importants de mobilité, qui incluent la mobilité, mais aussi la stimulation cognitive. Et ça, c'est vraiment clé parce que quand on est plus âgé et on est sur un civière, mais rapidement, on peut perdre et être déconditionné, qui peut soit prolonger le séjour à l'hôpital, mais encore plus important, même quelqu'un qui était avant mobile, mais des fois, ça prend des jours, sinon pas des semaines, à revenir à où on était avant d'hospitaliser. Alors, vraiment essentiel d'avoir ça. Également, de regarder, puis encore une fois, ces travaux-là, planification précoce et conjointe, le mot conjoint très important, de congé. Vraiment des équipes qui regardent et planifient dès jour 1 de quelqu'un qui arrive, de voir comment on va planifier son congé pour réduire la durée moyenne de séjour. Puis, en groupe, il y a des choses qui sont faites pour planifier ensemble, pour ne pas travailler en silo, de voir comment adresser et optimiser le congé aux patients. Prochain diapo. En termes d'éducation, il y a eu, on est très grand, alors on avait des différents regroupements avant en termes de, par exemple, les stages au CUSM. Alors, les infirmières travaillent séparément des physiothérapeutes, des résidents, etc. Alors, avec notre nouvelle directrice d'éducation, de créer un groupe intersectoriel pour regarder comment est-ce qu'on peut améliorer l'offre de stage, le onboarding pour les stages. En plus de regarder pour changer et améliorer le site web. Ça, c'est encore en travail pour l'accès aux stages ici au CUSM. Et un partage de meilleures pratiques. Nous avons également eu une inauguration du centre de simulation pédiatrique. What's interesting about the Pediatric Simulation Center, as well as actually our simulation center in general, is the ability not only to do it at a certain site, but to do it there in a clinical setting. So, for example, in the NICU. And this makes things much more lifelike and realistic in terms of compared to when one actually lives through the situation. In terms of multimedia, a lot of educational videos that were done, both in French and the English for the MUHC community. And in fact, we have a lot of requests given that we have bilingual multimedia from our partner institutions to share these with them. Prochain diapo. En communication, on a parlé déjà du service de texto pour confirmer aux patients leur rendez-vous. Puis, ce qu'on a aussi fait, puis on fait maintenant ça de façon mensuelle. Nous avons débuté des webinaires pour les employés comme de l'hôpital, comme pour les médecins, pour partager avec ceux qui travaillent au CUSM qu'est-ce qui se passe. Et après chaque webinaire, il y a également un sondage pour vraiment diriger et s'assurer s'il y a soit des sujets qui ont été adressés ou qui doivent être adressés pour être sûr qu'on vise le webinaire pour être un plus-value et adresser les sujets d'intérêt pour ces personnes-là. Alors ça a débuté de façon régulière. On a eu 1, 2 l'année passée, mais vraiment maintenant c'est mensuel depuis le mois de janvier 2024. And the surveys also and we have people speaking there from upper management and management and really targeting different things to because it's so difficult to really have an overview of everything that's going on in the MUHC. Prochaine diapo. Also, to let everybody know, this is at the MUHC RI, the CLIP unit called the Clinical Innovation Platform. And I'm not sure how many people know about this really incredible space that there are multiple groups where you have physicians, you have engineers, you have people in software, you have people from university that are developing technologies in the healthcare system. So you have robotics being developed there. You have all kinds of things in terms of, for example, virtual reality for a surgeon to be able to help somebody in the far north to do interventions. So all kinds of really innovative and adoptive technologies that are up and coming. That hopefully some of them will find a usage either at the MUHC or even worldwide. So this is a very exciting unit that we have. Prochaine diapo. Pour vous partager aussi en termes de bilan pour le RH. Vraiment, on a, encore une fois, c'est sûr que ça c'est notre ressource le plus important et nous avons encore des lits fermés à cause d'un manque de ressources humaines. On a d'autres endroits où on a des personnes qui travaillent extrêmement fort, sous stress, etc. Alors, tout ça, c'est bien sûr encore en façon continue à travailler. Ici, je mentionne des indicateurs qui sont bien, mais c'est pas pour ne pas dire qu'il ne faut pas, par contre, travailler et adresser ce qu'on a encore à faire devant nous. Mais on a des différents cibles qui nous ont été données par le ministère en termes de ratio d'assurance salaire ou le taux de roulement, etc. Et bien sûr, on veut voir comment chercher et améliorer tout ce qui doivent être améliorés, augmenter le nombre de personnes qui travaillent, diminuer le nombre de départs, mais en termes de cible ministérielle, on est dans une position très favorable. Encore une fois, pour pas dire que c'est pas un de nos priorités absolument numéro 1 en termes de voir comment on travaille pour encore améliorer ça. Prochaine diapo. Ça, c'est logistique. Alors, vous voyez que je fais un petit peu un bilan de tous les différents, pas juste cliniques, mais aussi en administration. On voit qu'on a eu des éléments en termes de factures et des problématiques en termes avec nos suppliers pour voir comment avoir le turnover, etc. Encore une fois, il y a eu des changements de processus assez importants pour avoir une nette diminution depuis le sommet au mois de janvier l'année passée. Puis, on s'en va vers vraiment des systèmes électroniques partout où on peut. Par exemple, les signatures qui étaient toutes par papier sont maintenant, depuis le mois de mai, électroniques. Et ça, c'est pour tout, comme si on a besoin d'acheter n'importe quoi, puis on sait tous qu'il faut acheter plein d'équipements, de fournitures, etc. Et qu'il y a des délais qui ont diminué de 7 jours en utilisant les signatures électroniques versus dans le passé que ça a été tout par papier. In terms of the last thing that came actually, next slide. Thank you goes to Tina for this. She worked on this. Here we go. Thank you, Tina. Is that on the 29th of February, a date which occurs only once every 4 years, the ministry announced a wider pre-hospital program, which is going to include for the first time a helicopter program that to date is absent in Quebec, although it's present in every other jurisdiction in Canada. And there were 4 new helipads that were announced, one of which is at the MUHC, something that the community has been fighting for many years. So this is really fantastic news. And we're going to be working now with the ministry as well as with our foundations about making this come to life. What are the different clinical areas that that are appropriate for helicopter evaluation? Are really people who are between 50 and 250 kilometers away from the need of tertiary care. And so those areas are trauma, neonatal care, pediatric trauma, as well as adult trauma, and neurological and cardiac care, which are time dependent. So that is a project that we're going to be working on as well with the ministry that just came a few days ago. So thank you. We can go to the next slide. So those are some of the works. And again, it's not to say that there isn't a lot of work ahead of us. There certainly is, but I do want to share that as a team, there is a lot of work that were done in a lot of areas that did have measurable results that I think that we should thank all of the different administrative, clinical teams for coming together to work on that over the past year. I'll move now towards a change in the most recent change in our organogram. Next slide. I don't know that anybody can read anything there, but I'll say it verbally. There's now 3 regroupings instead of previously 2. So before there was Martine Alfonso PDGA of everything that's clinical, and a DGA for everything that was administrative. Alors, avant ça, on avait un PDGA, Martine Alfonso, pour tout ce qui était le volet clinique, et un DGA pour tout ce qui était les autres, administratifs, sportifs, qui était Patricia jusqu'à son départ l'année passée. What we did was we asked the ministry to make now 3 regroupings. Again, to keep PDGA for clinical elements, but to split, because there was a lot under that administrative hat. One which is supportive, and then one that is transformational. So to put together those areas that we want to see how that they need very tight workings together to move towards, as I mentioned, this clinical performance, see how we could measure ourselves easier and better. And so the ones that you see there are quality, the clinical performance team, the IT, as well as finance. Now, there are, why those in particular? There are, of course, other ones, everybody's involved actually in transformation, but those in particular are the ones that are going to be there for measuring and helping teams understand what those, helping a team understand what needs to be measured, how to interpret that measurement, and how that can help put things into place. Now, the other ones in terms of finance is that we're going to be very much looking at cost per casing, because we're really moving towards that. And so there's a lot of clinical performance that's closely tied to finance. And the last one, IT, there's a lot that can be automatized. We talked about laboratories, for example, the wait times that melted with automatization of things instead of manual. So there's many support structures that IT can help. And how can we do that to help in terms of addressing our access to care and our clinical performance? Alors c'est ça. Alors ce qu'on a fait, c'est qu'on a divisé le volet administratif pour faire un administratif et aussi un volet transformationnel pour mettre vraiment ensemble. Tout le monde est impliqué en transformation. Tout le monde. vraiment, mais ça, c'est quelques piliers qui vont faire, qui sont attitrés pour faire ça pour le mesure de performance, de supporter les autres équipes, de regarder qu'est-ce qui peut être mesuré, comment le mesurer, comment interpréter ce qu'ils ont mesuré. Le TI, évidemment, il y a beaucoup d'éléments en termes de TI qui peuvent être mis en place pour faciliter la transformation. Et maintenant, on a beaucoup de mesures en termes de financement, accès pour la performance qui vont être intimement liées pour lequel on a mis ces équipes ensemble. Prochain diapo. Some of the awards, and again, non-exhaustive, that are for which our teams have been recognized. Marina Klein and Sava Barkati were recipients of the FMSQ Prize for their recent publication in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is an incredibly prestigious journal. The Reproductive Center of McGill of the MUHC got a gold in the fertility specialist category. Next slide. Et notre docteur Sam Chemy, qui travaille aux soins intensifs néonatales, a eu le Grand Prix de Transplant Québec pour son engagement remarquable au sein de toute sa carrière pour l'avancement sur la pratique de don d'organes au Québec, mais vraiment, parce que Transplant Québec, c'est au Québec, mais vraiment, ses travaux étaient pan-canadiens. Next slide is just again sharing of some not just like the Bon Coup, just a few of MUHC in the news, non-exhaustive. We have the Foundation from the Children's recently opened up a hospital area, well, not hospital, a hospitality area where families from children who are coming in to be treated here from Quebec that need to stay while their child is hospitalized can be minutes away from the children's. So that recently opened. We have the 2 units that I mentioned already that were open, the ERAS unit in the day hospital. They also have something that I hope that I know that I saw many people from the MUHC come. The Alouettes came with the Grey Cup, and they came to the General, they came to the they came to the Glen, they came to the Children's. So both for patients as well as for employees, it was a lot of it was a very positive experience for the people that were there. Also, in terms of our cancer research, there was a several-page article in La Presse where, for example, Dr. Bernier's research in liquid biopsy was mentioned as the future of diagnosing cancer. Prochain diapo. Je pense que ça termine ma présentation. Est-ce que la personne qui présente après moi, Dr. Alan Forster, c'est un directeur de la performance clinique, transformation et innovation qui a commencé au CUSM en novembre 2023. He is an internist by training, also an epidemiologist, who worked as an executive VP in Ottawa for many years with different hats, but in terms of quality as well as innovation, and very happy to have him here as our director, as I mentioned in French, of Clinical Performance Transformation and Innovation. And he's here to speak to us today about the MUHC's innovation program.
Bon, merci beaucoup. Je vais parler en anglais, mais je m'appelle Alan Forster, comme Dr. Patrick Handy. So I'm going to speak to the MUHC, and I guess the other thing is MUHC RI Innovation Program. As was described previously, my role is straddling both the MUHC and the RI. And I think that's really important because the innovation, and I'll get to an example of it, but innovation is really about how we move things from new ideas to a product that actually helps meet a need of the business, and then how that then gets adopted and used to generate benefits to the business. And of course, research is really critical because that's where the pipeline of all the great ideas comes from. But research is also important because research is used to help define what the needs are. Research helps understand whether those needs are met. And research also helps us understand whether value is created. So there's a huge amount of this which is grounded in research, but I will also say it's very, very important for it to be situated in the hospital or in the health system, because the hospital and the health system is where we have the needs, and we are the ones who are the recipients of the benefits of the value. So in many ways, there is a synergy here that's created, because by the MUHC is where we have the needs, and the research institute is the area where we can generate the ideas and help evaluate. So there is a real important part of this where bridging between the two institutions is relevant. So I mentioned the definition. It can be stated in different ways, but it really is around understanding what the customer needs, and in this case, it's our patients, and helping them understanding their pain points, and then bringing ideas through a variety of means to helping people get those needs met and create value. And I put an example here of a Montreal MUHC innovation that's actually working today. It was created at the Montreal Children's Hospital. And I've walked through it a little bit because, on the left-hand side, you see where the new ideas are coming from. It's really these new technologies, artificial intelligence, as well as the 3D scanning capabilities now that are on our phones. But these smart people in the Children's Hospital thought, they're doctors who look after people who have scoliosis, and they were frustrated a little bit because there was long waiting lists for their services. They saw how inconvenient it was for their patients who had to go for appointments and scans. So they used the 3D scanning and the artificial intelligence to help take essentially images of people with their phone, and using the AI algorithms, they could actually predict the curvature of the spine in a way that was as accurate as X-rays. So now you can take a picture at home. Your mother or your friend or your brother or sister could take a picture of your back, and you can see the picture of a lady who's got scoliosis, and it can tell you whether the curvature is getting better or worse, and is it getting better and worse as per treatment that you're receiving, and should you then go to either continued exercise treatment, or should you go towards a more surgical route? And this is like on the early trials, this is having great impact, because first of all, it's typically young girls, we can reduce the need for X-rays, and a reduced exposure to X-rays of young women is very important because there are risks associated with the radiation. But also it's a convenience issue. That there's they don't have to go to the doctor, they don't have to go to the appointment. They can do much of it remotely and virtually. Of course, they can go if they need input, and there are regular checkups, but a lot of it is being done now virtually. And hopefully, we're going to see a reduction in the need for surgery if people are more engaged in their treatment, because they're getting more feedback as they go. We're going to see a reduction in a need for surgery. So huge benefits, and we all now, like this. What these guys did is they initially started with this idea. They developed it at the Children's Hospital. They then said, well, there's something here. In order to get this out to market, well, let's create a company. Let's start figuring out how to market. So they worked with the Dobson Center here at McGill University, and they have a program for young entrepreneurs, and they help those people now grow, come up with a scale-up methodology for their company. And now they're in the process of seeking customers all over the world where people will benefit from this potential benefit from this product. And so like from the early studies, they do see these signals that we're seeing decreased x-rays, decreased visits, decreased need for improved compliance. The surgery and health benefits are still not there, but you need long studies and lots of people to start seeing this. But there is a strong theoretical reason. So could we make that happen more often? I thought that story is important because it just illustrates how this can work. And that's really what we're seeking now, is how can we help people do more of this so that we can get those benefits and accelerate it. Next slide. So I think it's also important to answer what is an innovation program, because innovation is one thing, but then, and I'll just say that to create what I just described was done in the absence of an innovation program. So you're always going to have good things happening in institutions because there's always great people in institutions, and like at McGill and at MUHC, you're going to have lots of great ideas because there's so many great people. But the idea is, how can we make that now fit into into something that actually brings, like, accelerates the benefits to the patient, to our patients, and to our staff, and to our institution, while at the same time diminishes some of the risks, and I'll talk about some of those in a moment. And really, that's really about what the program is meant to do. It's supposed to facilitate the initiatives to make these things happen, while at the same time make sure it's aligned with our goals. So it doesn't seem as a competing agenda, it seems as an aligned supporting agenda. And I think sometimes innovation, if it's not managed carefully and is not aligned with goals, it can sometimes be seen as a pull from the business, because it's not seen, it doesn't fit in. That's typically where we get trouble with innovation. But I show here this picture, which has got, always focused on the clinical need, and moving through, the idea generation to selection of that as something we want to promote, to development of a minimally viable product, to something that we can then test either in a lab environment or in a clinical environment, and then moving from there to thorough evaluations in the field, and then to scaling and marketing. And that's really what the program itself is really trying to articulate. Where do we need to help with that, and how do we bring in capabilities? And some of this I'll go through in a minute. We have a lot of great things already. It's sometimes just about connecting the dots and making sure that there's clarity as to how things proceed. Next slide. So why do we need to have an innovation program? The first is that on the positive side, there are great opportunities to take advantage of. We have, in the middle there are our people, and there are great people. Every time I come to work, I've only been here for 4 months, but every day I come to work, I find someone doing something amazing here. And I'm still learning a lot every day. And that we need to give those people who are great opportunities to be even greater. If we don't, they get frustrated and they leave. And I think it inspires teams to see one person on the team doing something amazing, and it inspires other people to do amazing things. So to our people, I think this is an outlet that really makes a big difference. On the left of them is a bunch of hurdles. We have staffing shortages. We have a demography that's increasingly challenging, from a number of people who need care to the type of care. We have financial realities we have to live with. Somehow the government is giving us extra money this year, but that won't last, I don't think. And we have evolving business models as a result of these things, and those are all opportunities for the innovation program to add value. And then on the right, we have our city of Montreal, which is, has a great economic potential in, the financial sector, in digital technologies, pharmaceuticals. And of course, our academic sectors are really great contributors to economic and well-being in our city. And so we need to take advantage of that. And we can benefit, our health system can benefit from that. Next slide. The other thing is, of course, we have risks. When we're implementing big system changes, there's sometimes uncertainty as to whether something will work, and we can use innovation as a methodology for understanding those risks and limiting the risk by doing things on smaller scales. Examples would be when new medical devices or new information technologies come forward, we sometimes can't afford to do it. There may be sometimes uncertainty about the safety or effectiveness, and so we can establish procedures and trials to bring them into the real world before going forward. You know, there are conflicts of interest when we do these kinds of things, and a programmatic approach where we articulate where we typically see conflicts of interest and manage those and making sure the perception of conflict is not actual conflict, and make sure that we communicate effectively so that those perceptions don't become, you know, the reality in people's minds. There's not enough money to do all the things we want to do, and we need clarity as to what we have to spend on innovation activities. And if we don't have it in one area, it becomes uncertain what we're spending. And then, as I said, and then the last part is the chaos of our world. We have many competing demands, and when a doctor or a scientist comes forward with a great idea, it can be very stressful for the teams, the operational teams that are already stretched. So for us to have a methodology that's clear and transparent, that we can state why we're doing something and how it's being supported, I think, and what's in it for the business, I think is very important for that chaotic situation. Next slide. So our strategy is I've got the picture here again. It's really about making this pathway very clear, both to people in the institution and outside of the institution, while supporting people along this pathway. And you know, and ultimately it's grounded in our business needs. So do we project or do we foresee benefits to the care that we're giving to patients, to the productivity and efficiency of our system, productivity of people, and that includes like how easy it is and how stressful it is for our people, and then also to the health of our populations. And all of the innovation needs to have a connection to this purpose, this triple aim purpose. There's a single path with on and off ramps. So I'll give you an example. We can do projects to help develop an MVP with some people in our hospital, and minimally viable product. Then they can go off and find a way to scale that themselves. We don't need to be involved. Other times we might have a company come in here and want us to do help them with their go-to-market strategy. Because we can help them evaluate value in a clinical setting in Quebec, for example, or help them translate their product into French, for example. The support is actually what people are lacking right now in our institution. There's a lot, as I said, a lot of great ideas. A lot of times they just don't know where to go to do the next step in the process. There's no clarity as to what the process is, and there's no understanding of how to move it forward. And so just by describing the process and then creating sort of what I'll call a concierge or a navigation methodology, it will become much easier for people. Next slide. How will we succeed? Alignment to health system goals, and that includes obviously ours. The process needs to be optimized, and I've listed 3 key ones. The risk assessment is really critical. And the three risks, there are risks on patient privacy whenever we're doing these projects. They're often low risk events from a patient harm perspective, but we need to make sure that that's always front and center. We have, I talked about some of the conflict of interest risks. Sometimes that comes with a reputational risk. And then there's the competing demands and whether we're going to be distracting to the operation. So those are all risks that need to be managed carefully, and every project needs to be assessed. But we need to move them through quickly. I often think sometimes the risks are overblown because at certain times there's actually high risk to not doing anything to understand what to do. And so we need to make sure that we can really articulate what the true risk is on the downside, as well as what the upside is. Access to funding, there is funding from a number of sources, but we need to facilitate and make it easier, and that includes funding from venture and capital placement markets and sources, as well as government programs and sponsorship. And again, we have to make that acceptable and understood how we do that, and we're working with the foundations to help with some of that work. And then the last part is on the procurement. A company doesn't want to invest time and energy in making a product if there's no one to buy it. And so we need to understand how we can build a process by which, if targets are met in terms of productivity or better patient care or health, how does that translate into a purchase decision here in Quebec? And so we're working with the Bureau d'Innovation, which is it's a subgroup of the Ministry of Economy that has now become part of the MSSS to help facilitate some of these procurement decisions, as well working with our own procurement team to make sure. So these are three really critical pieces of an innovation program. Then kind of more fun stuff is the training and support, community engagement, and then the benefits realization. Like how do we make sure we're getting the returns back to the program, and then returns back into the institution in a way that's consistent with our legal obligations. Next slide. I'll mention two assets. One's firmly in place. Dr. O'Patterney mentioned it earlier. The CLIP, the Clinical Innovation Program, it's been running for several years. It is truly a program that is really international class in terms of innovation incubators. And it's been kind of flying under the radar screen to a certain extent, but it's beginning to now take wings, and it's going to help us launch and be very, very successful. This was a visit by the Associate Deputy Minister. It was a great honor to host him here. But we were able to showcase some of the products and companies that are coming through. I'll mention one, like you see Johnson & Johnson there in the middle. They're now, they acquired a company that grew out of collaboration here at the CLIP, a Quebec-based robotic company called Kinova. And now they've moved, it's in production, it's being used all throughout the United States, and we're now working with Johnson & Johnson to think about a protocol here at the MUHC to test it out in Quebec patients. And again, we're doing that, early discussions with the Bureau d'Innovation to help us support that. So that just shows that pipeline from something that, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, robotics surgery and robotic interventions were not something we would even think about, but now we've got a Quebec-grown idea that started here at the MUHC and is now, being marketed by a global company. Another one there, and I don't know if people saw the news, the Petit VR. That's a platform for supporting training of medical personnel for trauma, how to look after pediatric trauma. So you can imagine like the stress involved in looking after little kids after a car accident. Well, what they realized in the pediatric trauma center here at the Montreal Children's was you can't learn how to handle that stress when these events are happening. You have to learn through simulation, rather than, what they did is they took it a step further and built a virtual reality simulation. And now they've built a company around that. And now they're selling that to people around the world. And so again, another place where a problem that was solved, that was identified by our people, a way to solve it by our people, and now getting national attention, international customers. I mentioned the Momentum Health already, but I'll just say that there's many of these that are coming through. There are many of these coming through, and I think we should be proud. And I think just the fact that these are now starting to happen is something that we can accelerate. There's a couple of other programs, and the surgical and interventional sciences program is one where I think it's something that is fitting into this nicely, but there's broader opportunities to link to digital innovation and programs that the Department of Medicine started, as well as I mentioned Dobson earlier, to help fit into that understanding of how to grow a company. It may be one thing that we can come up with the idea, and we may even understand the needs of the people in the system quite well, but to think about then how we grow it from that to something that then other people can benefit from, or even sustain it here at our institution, we really do need the business expertise. And so connecting, and again, that's a place where what happens here. Next slide. The other piece of this, which is really critical, is access to data. Oftentimes when people are developing a product or an idea, you can only know if it's working by understanding what the results are in a clinical study. And so accessing data is a really critical part. One of the companies on that slide was a company called MD Clone. We recently are now in the process of trialing that out with MD Clone with the MUHC data, and we're going to create something called an ADAM Center, which is their methodology of helping people get access to data. And the exciting thing about their work is they use artificial intelligence to actually help people get access to data in a way that makes it actually almost zero risk of patient identification and removing the risk of patient privacy by generating something called synthetic data. And I can talk more about that. And that ties actually back to that MUHC scorecard initiative, because by allowing people getting access to data, they can then start to ask questions about what's driving performance. Next slide. I've talked about some of the examples, and I think I'll leave it there, just to say that there are companies that were born out of ideas that we had here at the MUHC that are solving problems that we have here, but there are also many companies from outside of us that want to come in and work with us. The CLIP is the platform for that to happen. The ADAM Center will help that happen. The idea is, how can we make this go from the sort of 20 companies that are listed here to the 40 or 50, and how can we tie that back to the demonstrable benefits that we really need to have? And that's what the program will be. Last slide. And so I'll just finish on this one. What does success look like? On the left is the revenue. We do see that there's a need for investment in R&D in healthcare, and most of the money today that we have to run the business are tied to specific operational care delivery needs. So the system has trouble innovating and trouble investing, because every dollar is coming to us is for operations. By building a program that starts to say, look, we can solve problems and we can create this platform, that generates revenue that can then be turned back into helping transform the systems. And that's truly what when we look, if I come back here in a year or two, the idea that you should be tracking, one of the things is how much revenue are you generating that's getting invested in R&D. And that, I think, is a number one measure of our program. The second is around the collaboration and working together to solve problems. Often healthcare is troubled by silos, and the silos limit our success, and so multidisciplinary collaboration Evidence of that is a second impact. And then the third would be, we are seeing improvement in quality as a result of adoption of the technologies we're creating. So the momentum health will see, reduced we'll see reduced visits, whereas, and perhaps less need for surgery, for the less need for x-rays, which will help our wait time for x-rays. The Petit VR will see, improved trauma response, reduced complications. All of these can be tied to very specific outcomes. And we would, every project we do, we will want to see those benefits. And that's that. That's my talk, and I hope that was
very exciting
to hear. Happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Des commentaires ou des questions des membres du conseil? No? Wow. I think it's the right place for the MUHC.
I have a comment, not a question.
Education is one of our axes of our responsibilities. So. On est responsable pour l'innovation, donc on devrait y agir. Y a-t-il des questions sur le variant? Je ne pense pas, parce qu'on ne l'a pas soulevé au début. Donc, on va passer tout de suite à la période des questions. Any questions received? Yes?
Yes.
And Dr.
5 questions.
5 questions?
5 questions.
I'll leave it to Dr. O'Patrigney and those who are going to answer the questions. Which is the first question?
Alors, je vais répondre aux questions dans la langue qui nous ont été posées. Il y a quelques questions que je vais répondre et pour d'autres, je vais demander à Mme Alfonso de répondre. First question by Robert Bloom, who is co-chair of the Family Advisory Forum. To whom is the CUC membership accountable if they have engaged in uncivil, discriminatory, and racist behaviors? What measures can be taken to protect patient committee members from the abuse of power of the CUC? When they misuse confidentiality to oppress the voices of members they are continuing to victimize. Both free speech and right of association and rights are guaranteed under the Canadian Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. So thank you for these. There are multiple questions in here, Mr. Bloom. So I think first we should clarify a misconception that the MUHC has multiple patient committees and a CUC, which stands for Central Users Committee. This is no longer the case. Since the election of a new committee in November 2022, there is only one patient committee, and it changed its name to the MUHC Users Committee to reflect this reality. For a subcommittee, including the Family Advisory Forum at the Montreal Children's Hospital, to be recognized, it must be approved first by the MUHC Users Committee and work collaboratively with it to fill its mandate, which is defined in the Act Respecting Health and Social Services. And in addition, it must respect rules of those subcommittees of ethics, confidentiality, and other bylaws as determined by the MUHC Users Committee. Under the law, the committee has a functional autonomy, the committee being the MUHC Users Committee, has a functional autonomy in terms of its operating rules. However, its power is obviously not absolute. It's accountable for its actions to the users and must answer to the board of directors of the MUHC. The committee must submit an annual report of its activities and expenditures, including any of the subcommittees that it has approved under its responsibility to the board, as well as to the Ministry of Health and Social Services. In terms of the other element of the question, another question, the board is not aware of any MUHC Users Committee member having engaged in any behaviors that disregard MUHC policies, including its civility and respect policy, which covers psychological, discriminatory, and sexual harassment and violence, nor does it condone such unbecoming behaviors. If somebody wishes to report wrongdoing, he or she may reach out in writing to the board or contact Maître Catherine Brisson of the MUHC Management Advisor for a respectful environment free from violence and harassment. Maître Brisson oversees the respect and civility and disclosure of wrongdoing policies and procedures at the MUHC. As a resource, she handles reports of non-compliance and helps find solutions of disputes. She can be reached at 514-934-1934, extension 71819, or by email on our website. So that's the first question. I'll go on to the next questions. Okay, the next question is from John Arthur, community member. Who has authority over the CUC? Again, the CUC is no longer a term. Chairs for misconduct and abuse of power when they have conducted themselves in an uncivil and disrespectful manner towards patients. Is the MUHC CUC in service to all patients seeking assistance or only those they prefer to select? What are the criteria for users to receive assistance from the CUC? I'll just remind everybody that the CUC is no longer a term that's functioning. It is the MUHC Users Committee. Many of these elements were covered in the previous question, but I'll address the other two. The MUHC Users Committee is legislated by the Act respecting health and social services. The committee serves all MUHC patients as well as long-term care center residents seeking assistance. The only criteria to receive assistance is to be an MUHC patient, a center of the Centre d'Hébergement Camille Lefebvre, or a relative of either of these categories. The third question, Diane states, a community member, is going to be, I'll read the question and it'll be answered by Martin Alfonso. Since the recommendations of the CADE report, is there an MUHC EDI office or committee where we can report racism and discrimination by members of the hospital community and committees? Is the EDI office committee made up of diverse members, including somebody with a disability?
Thank you, Dr. O'Patterney. In response to Mrs. State's question, so we are following up on the CADE recommendation that were adopted a year ago by the MUHC board, as was already reported in the a previous board meeting. There was a task force struck and a structured action plan was designed. During this process, there was an inventory of the large number of activities, initiatives, and training that are ongoing at the MUHC, and these continue. Of course, we'd like to learn from each other, like in the clinical world, learn from each other and see if initiative in one area could be useful in another. So that's something that we want to do moving forward. In order to structure that, there was a request made at the ministry last fall, and we are still awaiting for funding. We are still awaiting the answer from this financial request. In the meantime, Dr. O'Patterney mentioned the MUHC advisor for a respectful environment free of violence and harassment, and we would invite members to address their concern or their complaint to Madame Brisson.
Thank you. I'll go on to the next question from Rosalind Halverson, who's a community member. Is there anything being done to remedy the shortage of staff and any other problems at the Montreal General Hospital lab causing some of the blood tests usually carried out at the MGH to be transferred to the JGH, Jewish General Hospital? For example, is more staff being recruited, or is the arrangement with the Jewish General to be permanent?
Thank you, Mrs. Alverson. For a number of years now, the MUHC UptiLab cluster is overseeing the lab activities at the MUHC, but also in CUS L'Ouest, CUS Centre-Ouest, including the Jewish General Hospital, and 7 sites in the Abitibi-Témiscamingue region. We are currently in the process of organizing tests and automating analytical platforms that will allow us to be more efficient on a global scale. So what we are targeting is shorter turnaround times and efficient use of our resources. There is a very significant shortage in medical technologists throughout the province. Vacancies rate between 35% and 50%, so it is a challenge to maintain the services, and it is a good managerial practice to use all sites to offer efficient care. So we are looking at this very thoroughly, constantly. Monsieur Enzo Caprio, director of Optilab, MUHC, and Dr. Alan Spatz, thank you, Dr. Spatz, are overseeing this and are actively working on this. So it's a challenging area because of the staff shortage.
The last question comes from Dr. Kanwahahali Rourke, who is the director of the Indigenous Health Professions Program of McGill University. And her question is the MUHC applying or have we implemented Joyce's principle at an institutional level across the various streamlines of the MUHC? Care and services to patients, research and teaching. Or are we social culturally safe care and research practices for Indigenous patients simply at the whim optional for the workforce at the hospital? To what degree, if any, are the tenets of Joyce principle applied? Do you have an office or department that is responsible for the enforcement and monitoring of a socio-culturally safe care, research and teaching with respect to Indigenous and other marginalized patients?
Thank you, Dr. Rourke. So Joyce's principle were adopted in the recommendation made by the C8 committee. The task force has continued to work on this, but this is a journey. We currently have at our partnership office Indigenous liaison agents that accompany families from the First Nation communities that are in the hospital or are coming for care at the MUHC. But we'll continue to partner with leaders at McGill University, at the Research Institute, where there's work done in equity, diversity, and inclusion to continue to help transfer the knowledge that's being shared with students as part of the curriculum. And we'll continue to bring that to our workforce and our teams to create an optimal healing and working environment. Again, this is a journey that the MUHC has just started and will continue.
Excellent. Is that all the questions?
Yes.
So I thank everyone who wrote in and asked questions for their questions, and thank you, Lucy and Hudson, for your answers. And if there's nothing else, then I wish you a wonderful weekend. Je vous souhaite une bonne fin de semaine et merci d'avoir participé à cette réunion. Thank you so much for being here.
Do you want an adjournment official?
Oh yes, please, go for it. Motion carried. Thank you. All right, well done.
Hold on.
Thank you.
Are we gone?
No.
Where did I said part?